The Grand Synod of the Ethelgard did not shout. They resonated. In the cavernous expanse of the high chamber, where the walls were hewn from the living crystal of the planet's crust, and the ceiling was lost in the atmospheric haze of incense and gravity dampeners, the silence was not an absence of sound, but a heavy, physical weight. It pressed against the breathing vents of the 300 delegates, a silence that smelled of ozone and ancient stagnation. High Justicar Kalen stood at the center of the obsidian dais, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the dim, amber light of the captured star that hung suspended above the council. He felt the vibration of the floor, the low hum of the planet's core, but more than that, he felt the crushing inevitability of the verdict he was about to deliver. The Galactics, a coalition of species so advanced they had forgotten the feeling of soil beneath their feet, were desperate. The encroaching shadow from the outer rim, the entity known only as the Void Hollow, had consumed 3 star systems in a single rotation. The fleets of the Ethelgard, the shimmering golden armadas of the Cygnus, and the mathematically perfect drones of the Vexen had all shattered like glass against a stone wall. They needed ships. They needed matter to throw into the grinder of war. And so they had turned to the graveyard. They had turned to the dormant hulls, vessels deemed too archaic, too structurally compromised, or too energetically inefficient for modern combat. And in their desperation, they had made a decision that Kalen found both laughable and tragic. They were gifting the Vesper 7, a hull classified as a structural liability, to the Terrans. The murmurs began as a low thrumming in the throat sacs of the assembled elders. Kalen raised a slender, chitinous hand, demanding quiet. The Vesper 7 was not merely old. It was a joke. It was a cargo hauler from the era of silence, a period when the galaxy was at peace and ships were built without shielding, without weapon mounts, and with engines that relied on volatile, dirty fusion rather than the clean, infinite loops of zero-point energy. It was a bloated, ugly thing, a labyrinth of decaying corridors and leaking radiation scrubbers. To give it to the humans, the youngest, most fragile species to be granted a seat at the low table, was an insult disguised as aid. The humans had no fleet. They had only their relentless curiosity and their strange, disturbing calm. Kalen looked out over the assembly, his voice projecting through the acoustic amplifiers. "The decision is ratified," he intoned, the translators stripping his voice of its natural harmonic sorrow and replacing it with flat, bureaucratic authority. "The Vesper 7, henceforth designated as the discarded logic, is transferred to the Terran Mandate. They have claimed they can retrofit it. They have claimed that the hull is not weak, but merely asleep. We have granted them cycle time to prove this absurdity. When the Void Hollow arrives at the terminus line, the Terrans will stand with us. Or more likely, they will die in the first volley, and their debris will serve as a momentary distraction for our own retreat." A ripple of grim amusement moved through the hall. It was a cruel calculation, but the Ethelgard were masters of calculus. The humans were soft. Their bodies were squishy sacks of water and calcium, easily broken by high-G maneuvers. Their minds were prone to emotional turbulence. And they were being given a ship that groaned under its own weight, a ship that the finest Ethelgard engineers had declared unsalvageable junk. The transition from the opulent, silent gravity of the high chamber to the docking bay of the Vesper 7 was jarring enough to induce nausea. Archivist Laura, assigned as the liaison and observer to the Terran contingent, adjusted her respiration mask and tried to steady her trembling limbs. The air in the docking bay was thick, smelling of burning metal, recycled sweat, and distinct, sharp hydrocarbons. It was a dirty smell, a primitive smell. She stepped onto the gantry, her robes trailing on the grate, and looked up at the ship. It was hideous. Unlike the sleek teardrop curves of Ethelgard vessels, which looked like liquid silver frozen in time, the Vesper 7 was a blocky, scarred mountain of dull gray alloy. It looked like a brick thrown through a window. Scaffolding clung to its sides like parasites, and sparks rained down in cascades from a dozen different points on the hull. The noise was deafening. The screech of grinders, the boom of heavy impacts, the shouting of voices in the harsh, guttural Terran tongue. Laura had expected a crew of scientists, perhaps a few solemn engineers gently coaxing the machine to life. Instead, she found chaos, or what looked like chaos. She navigated the gantry, dodging a team of humans hauling a massive, rusted conduit. They were not wearing power-assist exoskeletons. They were lifting it with their own M. Usculls, their faces red with exertion, grunting in unison. It seemed barbaric. Why risk biological damage when a drone could perform the task? She found the entry lock, a gaping maw that had been torch-cut open because the original hydraulics had failed centuries ago. Standing there, consulting a datapad that looked as battered as the ship, was the human commander. Commander Elias Thorne did not look like a warrior. He looked like a man who had not slept in a week and likely regarded sleep as a personal failing. He was shorter than Laura, stocky, with graying hair cropped close to a skull that seemed too hard for his skin. He wore a stained jumpsuit, the insignia of the Terran coalition barely visible beneath smears of grease. He didn't salute. He didn't bow. He simply looked up from his datapad, his eyes dark and unsettlingly still. "You're the observer," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was gravel, low and resonant, cutting through the industrial din. Laura straightened her spine, trying to project the dignity of her caste. "I am Archivist Laura of the Ethelgard. I am here to document the restoration of this vessel and to ensure that your modifications do not contravene the safety protocols of the High Synod." Thorne looked at her, then past her, toward a group of welders near the engine intake. "Safety protocols," he repeated, tasting the words as if they were slightly spoiled food. "If we follow your safety protocols, Archivist, this ship won't clear the mooring clamps. We aren't restoring her. We're waking her up, and she's cranky." Laura blinked, her nictitating membranes flashing across her eyes. "The vessel is inanimate, Commander. It does not possess temperament. It possesses structural fatigue and obsolete avionics. The High Council believes this ship is a liability. They expect it to fail." Thorne finally looked her in the eye, and for a moment Laura felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's climate control. "The Council sees a pile of scrap because they look at the specs," Thorne said quietly. "We look at the bones. This ship was built to haul unimaginable weight across the dark. It's over-engineered in ways your people forgot because you got too good at efficiency. Efficiency is fragile, Archivist. Redundancy is survival. Come. I'll show you why this weak ship is going to break the teeth of the Void Hollow." The tour of the ship was a descent into madness. Laura followed Thorne through corridors where the floor plating had been ripped up to expose thick bundles of cabling. The lighting was erratic, flickering between the cool blue of the original Ethelgard strips and the harsh, yellow glare of portable Terran floodlights. Everywhere, humans were working with a frantic, focused intensity that frightened her. They weren't just repairing, they were butchering the ship to rebuild it. In the primary reactor chamber, Laura stopped, horrified. The reactor, a massive sphere of containment glass and magnetic coils, was open. Humans were inside the containment field, deactivated, she hoped, wielding laser cutters. "This is madness," Laura whispered, her translator clicking rapidly. "That is a Class 4 fusion drive. It is designed for steady-state output, strictly regulated. You are bypassing the governors." Thorne nodded, watching his crew. "Your governors limit the output to 60% to preserve the lifespan of the coils. We don't care about the lifespan of the coils. We care about the next 10 hours of combat. We're pushing the injection cycle to 120%. Laura stared at him. "The thermal stress will melt the containment housing." Thorne shrugged. "That's why we're welding cooling vanes from the outer hull directly into the core. We're going to use the vacuum of space as a heat sink. It's dirty, it's dangerous, and it'll make the hull temperature drop to near absolute zero on the outside. But inside, this thing will burn like a newborn star." "Why?" Laura asked, her voice trembling. "Why go to such lengths for a vessel that is fundamentally inferior? The armor is pitted. The targeting sensors are centuries out of alignment. Even with more power, you cannot hit what you cannot see." Thorne stopped walking and turned to her. They were standing on a catwalk overlooking the cavernous cargo hold, which was being filled not with supplies, but with massive, solid tungsten rods, thousands of them bolted to the deck plates. "Inferior," Thorne mused. "That's a word you aliens use a lot. You see technology as a ladder. You climb up and you discard the rungs below you. Terrans, we don't see a ladder, we see a toolbox. Just because a hammer is old doesn't mean it can't drive a nail. And this ship, it's not a fighter, it's not a dreadnought, it's a brick. A massive, dense, unstoppable brick. Your ships rely on shields, Archivist, energy barriers. The Void Hollow eats energy. It drains shields in microseconds. We know this from the TAC. Tickle data you sent us. Your beautiful, elegant ships turn off their shields and then they are made of foil." He gestured to the tungsten rods below. "This ship doesn't have shields. We stripped the emitters out yesterday to make room for more capacitors. We are relying on armor, meters of it, and mass. We are turning this ship into a kinetic weapon. We aren't going to outshoot the enemy. We are going to outlast them." Weeks passed. The transformation of the Vesper 7 was grotesque and awe-inspiring. The humans welded slabs of ablative plating to the hull, making the ship look even more uneven and jagged. They installed point-defense cannons that relied on chemical propellants, gunpowder and railgun slugs, rather than plasma. Laura found the reliance on physical ammunition archaic, a logistical nightmare, but the humans insisted. "Plasma disperses," the gunnery chief, a woman named Rodriguez with oil permanently etched into her fingerprints, told Laura. A 20-kilo slug of depleted uranium moving at a fraction of C, that doesn't disperse, that ruins your day. Laura spent her evenings in her quarters writing reports to the High Synod. The Terrans are insane, she wrote. They treat the ship as if it were a living beast. They talk to it, they pat the bulkheads, they have named the reactor Old Bess. They work until they collapse, sleep for 3 hours, and return to work. They do not fear the void hollow. They fear failing their own standards. They have welded the airlock doors shut on decks 4 through 9 to increase structural integrity. They have removed the escape pods. She had paused for a long time before writing that last sentence. When she had confronted Thorne about the escape pods, he had simply said, "We don't plan on leaving. If the ship goes, we go." It motivates the engineering team to make sure the ship doesn't go. It was a level of commitment that the Ethelgard, with their preservation protocols and risk aversion algorithms, could not comprehend. The day of departure arrived. The Vesper 7, now rechristened by the High Synod as the Vessel of Foolish Hope, a translation Thorne ignored, preferring to call the ship the Anvil, disconnected from the station. Laura sat on the bridge, strapped into a crash couch that had been bolted to the floor with excessive rivets. The bridge was not the clean, holographic sanctuary of an Ethelgard command deck. It was a cramped cave of monitors, physical switches, and exposed wiring. The air hummed with the vibration of the overclocked engines. Thorne sat in the center chair, not relaxed but poised like a predator waiting in tall grass. "All stations," Thorne said, his voice calm over the comms. "Report. Reactor at 110%, holding steady. She's hot, Commander, but she's holding," came the voice of engineering. "Railguns loaded, capacitors charged, we are twitchy," said weapons. "Navigation locked, the fleet is forming up." Thorne nodded. "Take us out. Keep us in the shadow of the Ethelgard flagship. Let them be the shiny object." Laura watched the view screen. The Ethelgard fleet was magnificent. Hundreds of vessels, shining like jewels, formations perfect to the millimeter. And then there was the Anvil, a dark, rumbling ugliness trailing behind them, its engines spitting dirty iron trails that interfered with the local sensors. The Synod had placed them in the rear guard, essentially a garbage scow meant to absorb the first flank attack. Laura felt a pang of shame for her people and a strange, fierce protectiveness for the humans around her. They knew they were being used as bait. They simply didn't care. They met the void hollow in the dead space between the stars, a region of absolute cold where physics seemed to fray at the edges. The enemy was not a fleet of ships, it was a swarm. Thousands of biomechanical entities, sleek and black, moving with a hive-mind fluidity that defied analysis. They looked like shards of obsidian given life. The Ethelgard fleet opened fire immediately. Beams of coherent light and plasma tore into the swarm, vaporizing the leading edge. For a moment, it looked like a victory. But the void hollow adapted. The swarm shifted, the entities linking together to form massive, faceted mirrors that reflected the energy weapons back at the fleet. Laura watched in horror as the Ethelgard flagship, the Star of Dawn, took a direct hit from its own reflected lance. Shields flared and collapsed, the hull buckled. "They're reflecting the energy," Laura gasped. "Commander, they are immune to directed energy?" Thorne didn't blink. "I see it. Energy absorption and reflection. Neat trick." He keyed his mic. "Helm, bring us about. Vector 49 Alpha, put us between the flagship and the swarm." The helmsman, a young man with tattoos climbing his neck, slammed the throttle forward. "Aye, sir, engaging ramming speed." Thorne smiled, a thin, terrifying expression. "Not yet, just get us in the way." The Anvil groaned as the engines roar. To life. The ship, heavy and sluggish, shouldn't have been able to move that fast, but the humans had bypassed the inertial dampeners. Laura felt her internal organs shift. Gravity pressed her into the chair with bruising force. The ship surged forward, passing the retreating, burning Ethelgard cruisers. They placed themselves directly in the path of the incoming swarm. "They are targeting us," Laura screamed, watching the sensor board light up with red warnings. "They are preparing a high-yield plasma burst." Thorne leaned forward. "Let them." The beam hit the Anvil. The ship shuddered violently, the sound of tearing metal screaming through the hull. Laura squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for decompression, but the silence didn't come. "Report," Thorne barked. "Armor holding on decks 1 and 2. We lost the outer plating, ablative layers are vaporized, but the hull is intact. Heat levels rising, but we're stable." The engineering chief's voice was triumphant. "That slab of tungsten we welded to the prow took the brunt of it. It's glowing white-hot, but it didn't melt." Thorne nodded. "Good. They can reflect energy, but let's see them reflect physics. Weapons target the center of the mass. Full railgun volley, fire everything." The ship shuddered rhythmically as the railguns fired. Boom, boom, boom. These were not lasers. These were solid slugs of dense metal accelerated to relativistic speeds. There was no beam to reflect. There was only mass and velocity. The slugs slammed into the void hollow swarm. The mirrors shattered. The biomechanical ships crumpled, their delicate latticework obliterated by the sheer kinetic impact. It was brutal, ugly, and entirely effective. The swarm recoiled, the hive mind confused by this primitive assault. They were used to fighting light with light. They did not understand how to fight a rock thrown by a giant. "It's working," Laura whispered, staring at the screen. "By the ancestors, it is working." But the swarm was vast. They began to swarm around the anvil, ignoring the crippled Ethelgard fleet to focus on this new, annoying threat. They latched onto the hull, their cutting beams slicing into the armor. "Boarders!" security yelled. "They're breaching the hull on Deck 4. Thorn stood up, unclipping a kinetic pistol from his belt. "Vent Deck 4, seal the bulkheads, and tell the Marines to say hello." Laura watched the internal monitors. She saw humans in bulky, pressurized suits fighting hand-to-hand with the sleek, multi-limbed aliens in the corridors of the ship. The humans used shotguns, pry bars, and their own armored boots. It was a brawl. It was chaos. And the humans were winning, inch by bloody inch, because they knew the terrain. They had built the maze. The battle raged for hours. The Ethelgard fleet, seeing the garbage scow holding the line, rallied, but they were still ineffective against the swarm's reflection tactics. It was the anvil that drew the fire, the anvil that took the punishment. The ship was dying. Laura could feel it. The vibrations were wrong. The air was getting thin. Fires burned in a dozen sections. "Commander," the engineer called out, voice ragged. "Coolant lines are severed. The reactor is going critical. We can't dump the heat fast enough. Don't shut down. We're going to crack the planet." Thorn looked at the tactical map. The void hollow had coalesced into a single, massive shape, a sphere of darkness that was preparing to swallow the Ethelgard homeworld. It was ignoring the ships now, focusing on the planet. "We can't shut down," Thorn said softly. "If we stop, the fleet falls and the planet dies." He looked at Laura. His face was covered in soot, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "Archivist, you should get to the shuttle bay. There's one functional skiff left." Laura looked at him, then at the terrified crew, then at the monitor showing the doom of a civilization that had mocked them. She unbuckled her straps, stood up, and walked over to the engineering station. "I am an archivist," she said, her voice steady. "My duty is to record the history of the Ethelgard. History is being made here. I will not leave." Thorn looked at her, and for the first time there was no barrier between species, just respect. "All right," he said. "Then hold on." "Engineering," Thorn said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Drop the magnetic bottle." The bridge went silent. Dropping the magnetic bottle on a fusion core running at 120% was suicide. It would unleash the contained star. "Commander, do it, but channel the release. Divert all magnetic containment to the rear thrusters. Turn the drive into a shaped charge." The engineer gasped. "Sir, that will turn the ship into a missile. We'll be riding a fusion explosion." "Exactly," Thorn said. "Helm, aim for the center of that sphere, ramming speed, for real this time." The ship groaned as the magnetic fields shifted. The roar of the engines became a scream. The anvil, burning, bleeding, pieces of it falling away into the void, accelerated. It moved faster than a ship of its mass had any right to move. It became a streak of fire against the darkness. The void hollow sphere tried to move, but it was massive and arrogant. It had not anticipated a suicide run. It had not anticipated that any species would value the lives of others over their own survival. As they hurtled toward the darkness, Laura closed her eyes and reached out with her mind, a telepathic trait of her people she rarely used. She felt the minds of the humans around her. She expected fear. She expected regret. Instead, she felt peace. She felt a grim satisfaction. She felt a collective thought echoing from Thorn to the lowest deck hand, "Not on my watch." It was a defiance so pure it burned brighter than the reactor. And then, just as impact was imminent, just as the heat began to blister the paint on the bulkheads, something changed. The ancient core of the ship, the parts the humans hadn't touched, the parts that dated back to the era of silence, woke up. It wasn't a mechanical awakening, it was a resonance. Laura felt it in her teeth. The ship sang. The vibration shifted from a mechanical rattle to a pure harmonic tone. The monitors on the bridge flared white. "Commander," the sensor officer screamed, shielding his eyes. "Energy spike from the core. It's not fusion, it's something else. It's harmonizing with the void hollow." Thorn shielded his eyes. "What the hell is that?" The ship didn't impact the sphere, it passed through it. Or rather, the space around the ship folded. The weakness of the Vesper 7, its ancient, outdated design, contained a secret. The era of silence wasn't a time of primitive technology. It was a time of transcendent technology, forgotten by the Ethelgard in their pursuit of efficiency. The drive core wasn't just an engine, it was a tuning fork. The humans, by pushing it to the absolute breaking point, by stripping away the safety limiters, had hit the resonant frequency of the universe itself. The anvil erupted not with an explosion, but with a wave of white light that expanded outward, washing over the void hollow. The darkness of the enemy didn't burn, it unraveled. The biomechanical bonds holding the swarm together simply ceased to exist. The enemy dissolved into dust, scattered to the cosmic winds. The ship, glowing like a comet, shot out the other side of the cloud, tumbling, power failing, drifting dead in space. Silence returned to the bridge. The hum of the engines was gone. The lights were dead. Only the emergency chemical glow sticks illuminated the smoke-filled room. Thorn coughed, wiping blood from his mouth. "Status," he croaked. "Alive," someone whispered. "We're alive." Days later, the vessel of Foolish Hope, now officially renamed the Terran Vesper, was towed into orbit above the Ethelgard homeworld. It was a wreck. The hull was fused, twisted, and scarred, but it was whole. The Grand Synod was in session again, but the atmosphere had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a terrified awe. High Justicar Kalen stood on the dais, but he did not speak. He listened. Thorn stood before them, bandaged, leaning on a cane, flanked by Laura. Laura spoke first. "You called them weak," she said, her voice projecting without the need for amplifiers. "You called the ship refuse. You did not understand. The ship was a key, and the humans were the hand that turned it. They did not use logic. They used will. They used the one thing the Ethelgard have forgotten, sacrifice." Thorn stepped forward. He looked tired. He looked at the gathered elders of the galaxy, at the beings who had ruled the stars for millennia. "We found something in the logs," Thorn said, his voice rough. "When the core went critical, it downloaded the original schematics to our database. That ship wasn't a cargo hauler, it was a seeder. It was designed by your ancestors millions of years ago to terraform worlds, to create life. The drive core creates a field of Genesis. It reorders matter." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "The void hollow was antimatter entropy. We hit it with pure creation. We didn't just beat it, we healed it." The council remained silent. The revelation was shattering. Their garbage was the most powerful artifact of their civilization, and they had forgotten it because it didn't look like a weapon. "We are keeping the ship," Thorn said. It wasn't a request. "We're going to fix her up properly this time, and then we're going to go find where that void came from, because if there's one thing humans are good at, it's cleaning up messes." He turned to leave, the limping, battered crew of the Vesper forming a phalanx around him. Laura watched them go, then turned back to the council. She saw the fear in their eyes, not fear of the void, but fear of the humans. They had realized the truth. The humans were not just engineers or warriors. They were the heirs to the ancient Spiri. The Ethelgard had lost. They were the ones who would walk into the fire and come out holding the sun. The galaxy had changed that day. The hierarchy of power had been upended by a rusty ship and a crew that didn't know when to quit. As Laura walked out of the chamber to rejoin her new crew, she looked out the viewport at the battered hulk of the Vesper floating against the stars. It was ugly. It was broken. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The humans had made it unstoppable, not by making it perfect, but by making it human. And in the silence of the void, the Vesper waited, ready for the next impossible thing. The diplomatic fallout was immediate and complex, a storm of parchment and data packets that swirled through the galaxy's communication relays. But aboard the Vesper, life had returned to a rhythm of grinding metal and hushed conversations. The ship was in dry dock, a Terran dry dock this time, a massive scaffold floating in the Lagrange point of the Ethelgard home system. The aliens had offered their pristine orbital shipyards, climate-controlled and sterile. Thorn had declined. "She likes the cold," he had said, "and we work better when we can swear without offending the locals." Laura walked the corridors of the ship during the retrofit. It was different now. The desperation was gone, replaced by a quiet, brooding confidence. The crew walked with a different gait. They were no longer the scavengers of the fleet. They were the vanguard. Laura found Thorn in the observation blister, a small bubble of transparasteel protruding from the hull. He was watching the repair drones, Terran ones, spider-like and frantic, weave new armor plating over the scars of the battle. "Archivist," he acknowledged without turning. "Commander," she replied, taking her place beside him. The view was spectacular, the Ethelgard planet swirling with blue and violet clouds, the distant glitter of the rebuilt alien fleet. "The Council is debating granting humanity a permanent seat," Laura said. "They are calling you the architects of the resurgence." "It is a high honor." Thorn snorted, a short, sharp sound. "Honor doesn't patch a hull breach. I'd prefer they gave us access to their material fabricators. We need more tungsten." Laura smiled, a gesture she had learned from him. "They will give you whatever you ask. They are terrified that you will leave." Thorn turned to look at her. His eyes were tired, the lines around them etched deep by the stress of the command. "We are leaving, Laura. You know that. The signal we found. The one hiding inside the Void Hollow's noise." Laura nodded. The twist that had come in the aftermath of the battle had been the most disturbing revelation of all. When the Vesper's Genesis wave had unraveled the enemy, it hadn't just destroyed them, it had decoded them. The void hollow wasn't a natural phenomenon, it was a transmission. A weaponized frequency sent from a galaxy beyond the observable rim. "It's a beacon," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Someone sent that swarm. Someone is testing the defenses of this galaxy. We poked them in the eye. They'll be back." "You intend to go to them?" Laura asked, feeling the familiar tightening in her chest. "With this ship, it survived one encounter, Elias, to take it into the dark to the source." "It's the only ship that can do it," Thorne interrupted. "Your ships are too fragile. They rely on the grid, on the network. The Vesper, she carries her own world with her, that Genesis drive. We're barely scratching the surface of what it can do. My engineers think we can tune it to synthesize food, air, even fuel. It's a self-sustaining ecosystem in a can. It's the ultimate colony ship or the ultimate battleship." He paused, looking back out at the stars. "We're going to find who sent the swarm, and we're going to ask them politely to stop. And if they don't," he patted the bulkhead, a sound that rang solid and true, "then we'll introduce them to the anvil." The preparation for the deep voyage took months. The Ethelgard, realizing they could not stop the humans, poured resources into the project. They provided advanced sensor arrays, medical bays that could regenerate limbs, and cultural archives of every known species. "So you do not forget us," High Justicar Kalen had said, handing Thorne a data crystal containing the sum total of Ethelgard poetry. It was a gesture of humility that would have been unthinkable a year ago. But the most significant addition to the crew was not technology. It was volunteers. Ethelgard engineers, Vexen mathematicians, Cygnus pilots, hundreds of them petitioned to join the Vesper. They had seen the humans work. They had seen the impossible made real. They wanted to be part of the unreasonable effectiveness of humanity. Thorne accepted them on one condition. "You leave your rank at the airlock. On this ship, you pick up a wrench." The cultural integration was friction-heavy but fascinating. Laura watched as a delicate, floating Cygnus pilot learned to weld from a burly Terran sergeant. She saw Vexen drones being reprogrammed to play poker. The ship was becoming a microcosm of the galaxy, bound together not by treaties, but by sweat and the shared memory of survival. The weak ship had become the strongest bond between the stars. On the eve of departure, Laura stood on the gantry again. The Vesper looked different. It was still blocky, still ugly by traditional standards, but it radiated power. The armor was matte black now, absorbing the light. Massive radiator fins extended from the spine, giving it the look of a prehistoric beast. The engines idled with a deep, subsonic throb that shook the station. Thorne met her at the airlock. "Last chance to stay behind, Laura. Where we're going, there are no maps, no backup." Laura looked at the station, safe and sterile. Then she looked at the dark corridor of the ship, smelling of ozone and coffee. "I have resigned my commission as archivist," she said. Thorne raised an eyebrow. "Oh, unemployment doesn't pay well." "I am not unemployed," she said, stepping across the threshold. "I am the historian of the Vesper, and I believe my place is where the history is happening." Thorne grinned. "Welcome aboard, grab a wrench." The launch was silent. No speeches, no fanfare. The Vesper simply detached, turned its prow toward the darkness between the galactic arms, and engaged the drive. The Genesis field flared, a sphere of creation wrapping around the ship, protecting it from the harsh radiation of the void. Inside, the crew watched the stars streak into lines. They were heading into the unknown, riding a ship that had been thrown away, crewed by a species that had been underestimated, to face a threat that terrified gods. In the quiet of the observation deck, hours into the jump, Thorne and Laura stood together. "You know," Thorne mused, "there's an old Earth saying, 'God protects fools and ships named Enterprise.'" Laura tilted her head. "This ship is not named Enterprise." Thorne smiled, a secret, knowing smile. "No, but she's got the spirit, and she's got us." He looked at the reflection in the glass, human and alien standing side by side. "They called us weak," he whispered. "Let them come. Let them see what weak looks like when it has something to fight for." The Vesper vanished into the deep dark, a single spark of defiant light in an infinite ocean of night. The story of the weak ship was over. The legend of the Terran Vesper had just begun, and somewhere in the distant black, the entities that watched the galaxy felt a new sensation. A tremor, a hesitation. For the first time in eons, the darkness was afraid of the light, because this light didn't just shine, it burned, and it was coming for them. The final log entry of the departure, recorded by Laura, simply read, "Structure, unbreakable, morale, absolute, destination, anywhere they tell us we cannot go, we are the Vesper, and we are awake." The file closed, the galaxy turned, and the silence of the void was filled with the roar of a human engine, singing a song of defiance that would echo until the end of time. The unstoppable force had a name, and it was humanity. In the deepest archives of the Ethelgard, thousands of years later, the legend would be taught to younglings. They would be shown the hologram of the ugly, blocky ship. They would be told of the golden fleet that shattered and the iron brick that held. They would learn the philosophy of the good enough, the doctrine of the jury-rig, and the sacred prayer of the engineer. It works, don't touch it. But mostly they would learn that strength is not given, it is forged. It is hammered out in the cold and the dark with bleeding hands and stubborn hearts. And they would look up at the stars and wonder where the Vesper was now, still out there, still fixing the universe, one broken bolt at a time. The ship was not weak. It had simply been waiting for a crew crazy enough to love it, and in that love it had found its power. The humans didn't just make it unstoppable, they made it home. The transmission ended. The council chamber millennia later was still silent, but it was a silence of respect. The lesson had been learned: never judge the vessel by the hull, judge it by the fire inside. And never ever underestimate a human with a roll of duct tape and a grudge against the laws of physics. The end.